Alright, so there's the front portion of the driver's side rocker in place, and I have now started on my patch panel for the rear portion, and I have put the pinch seam bend in it, so that's going to fit up. Sorry about the camera work here. That's going to fit up along there like that. This is going to follow that line, and you can see I've drawn myself a line. Ignore the scratched out one, obviously. That was my first attempt, which wasn't quite right. But if you look, that's going to line up pretty well, and it'll bring us out. Now you can see I made two marks here initially. The one closest to me, furthest away from the vehicle, is the first mark that I made. Basically looking at the way that the very back of the fender here, or front of the fender I should say, front of the rear fender aligns. It seems like that would work well. The inner mark is the inner point of that fender, and I decided to kind of split the difference with my bend, and I think that'll work fairly well. I may reconsider that and come to the outside line. This is something where you just kind of have to do a little trial and error. I do have 2 extra pieces of this material cut, so if it winds up being scrapped, it's not a big deal. You know, I've got the allowance for that, but I think I might just go to that outside line, I think, and then we'll do I believe it's a 54-degree bend, and see how that looks. So I've got my bend done. I was not able to use my my handy dandy little bench vise pan brake, which I really like. It makes nice clean bends, very, very sharp lines. Instead, and the reason why I wasn't able to do that, I should qualify that. The reason why I wasn't able to do that is because the throat depth is very, very minimal. So even just this portion here is just too deep. It would have done this side, but it won't do this side. So I've had to use my homemade press brake, which is just made from some pieces of angle iron and some tube. So you got a V block there, and then obviously a complementary top die. And that's how I have gone ahead and made this bend. It worked out pretty good, but not perfect, so I will actually go ahead and use my other pieces of material that I mentioned, and this one will become scrap. But it's close. Let's have a look. So again, there's my front rocker in place. If I grab by the pinch seam here and put that in place, sorry about the camera work. So if I get that more or less in place, the back first bend lines up quite nicely. That's the bend is in pretty much the right position for me there, in order that it's gonna land just up on the fender where I want it when I'm done. But the front is just a little bit, I made my bend a little bit too close to the vehicle. You can see the gap that it's left me where my pinch seam is. If I match that up nicely, I have a gap at the pinch seam, and if I match my pinch seam up nicely, I have a gap there. And I really can't fix that, because trying to flatten this material out and rebend it, it'll just look terrible. It'll be all distorted. So this piece is now scrap, but what I've done is I've marked my new line where I want the front to go, and the back is correct. So I'll just mark a new line there, and then I'll take those dimensions and transfer them on to another piece which I sheared yesterday, which is sitting there. So I've got 4 pieces in total. I only need 2, so I've given myself plenty of room for error, which, well, there's an error. So let's fix that. The rear patch panel is just about complete. You can see I've cut off a large portion of it. I'll probably throw in some stills here so you can see what it looked like before I did that. But putting it in place here, it's fitting reasonably closely. So I need a little bit more angle on this top bend here. to make that work. And then what's going to happen, hopefully you can see it follows this line quite nicely now, and that bend is on quite an angle in order to keep that flush. If I had bent that straight across, then of course it would be jutting out at the back. But anyway, what I eventually want to do is have it tuck up underneath there just slightly. So I need just a little more bend on this, and it should basically just pop right up underneath, and I'm virtually good to go. We can get this thing finished up. So I'll put a little bit more bend on it using my pan brake in the vise. Now that I've got less material up here, it will fit, and we'll go ahead and get that bend tightened up and finally try it out one last time. Okay, so we've got these panels all ready for welding. I've drilled them out for spot welds on the bottom, and we've got a really nice mating surface on the top. Earlier in the video you'll have heard me talk about making a final bend up here, which I hadn't done at this point, but it turns out I really don't need to. It tucks up underneath this sill really well. If there had been rust in this portion and the customer had to cut it away right to the very lip here, then of course I would have had to incorporate that last bend. It would have been critical to keep the shape of the rocker correct. But because he's maintained this portion, I can just leave it as is, and it's worked out really well. Nice clean fit. I'm happy with it all the way to the back here. My only issue is a bit of a misfit there, but that's actually remedied simply by pushing up on it, so no issue at all. We'll tack that in place once it's obviously held up like that, and a really nice fit all the way to the back. I'll create a little plate to fill this area that'll get welded in and seam sealed so that it'll be nice and watertight. And then the same for the front. I've drilled and tapped this hole here. The bolt broke off, so I've redone it in 1/4 inch this time. We'll drill a matching hole in this plate obviously, but that's going to get welded on. I'll simply hammer this edge around once I've got it tacked in place, and then weld it fully, and then I will make a plate to fill that gap and seal it as well. So then we'll have a perfectly sealed, nice clean new rocker. So now what I will do is put a few tack welds into this thing and move on. The front and rear rocker panels on the driver's side are spot welded and stitch welded. Spot welded all along the bottom and stitch welded all along the top. And no, they're not the prettiest stitch welds, but it's tough to weld really thin material. You can see in a couple of spots it started to blow away on me, like right there. But you know, not a big deal. They're stitches rather than spots up here to make sure that they're really solid. What I'm going to do now is take a sanding disc and sand these down so they're almost flush, and then this crack will get finished up with seam sealer and smoothed over to look half decent. And then we will apply primer and either paint or rock guard over that according to the customer's wishes. I have fully welded the joint here between the two pieces because those are nice clean material, so easy to weld. So I figured why not, no need to use seam sealer on that. Looking at the back here, I can just create a nice little flat plate that's going to fill all this that I can weld in and seam seal. So that'll be nice and sealed up. You can see it's all zinc primed on the inside there for rust protection. And then at the front, there's my little plate that I made up. I have drilled and tapped the broken bolt there. I've drilled it out to 1/4 inch and tapped that, or I drilled it out to 3/16 rather and tapped it to 1/4 inch. And then this panel is fitting really nicely. I've just taken a ball peen hammer, not even a body working hammer, but just your average old ball peen, knock that into place so that it's shaped quite nicely. We'll just tack that, and then once that's tacked and held in position, I can go ahead and hammer all this portion around and make sure that it fits up really well, and weld it and seam seal it as well. And then of course I will create a little cap panel to go in there and seal all that off, and that way the fender will fit really nicely exactly where it should go. So that's the next step. I'll take you over actually and I'll show you the primed insides of the other rocker replacement panel. That side is not primed. The top is only where it's going to be covered up by the existing rocker, and the entire inside is zinc primed. Zinc primer really doesn't hold up to scratching or anything, abrasion at all very well, so that's why I only use it on the interior surfaces where it's never going to be touched. But it does work really well as a rust resistant primer in those applications. So there you go, that's done, and of course also the rear portion is done as well. Outside is clean, inside is zinc primed. So that part is capped off, and I bent that all around as I said I would. I had a pretty bad blow through right there, and that metal is really thin and challenging, so what I'm going to do is just seam seal that over, because it's not actually rust, it's just a hole from overheat. But I have created my panel to go in here now. I shaped my piece to fit nicely up into that section there, as you can see. And if we look over here, you can see that I've traced out the design of that. So I will cut to the insides of those lines so that I have a perfectly sized cap to go over there, and we'll tack that in place, and I'm going to do the same for the rear. Driver's side is done. All welded up, blended, and ready for seam sealing and paint. So again, this entire seam along here will be seam sealed. Up in behind here will be seam sealed. And these little gaps around here will also be seam sealed, just to make sure everything's nice and watertight from the top. So there you go. That's it. On to the passenger side. Another rear rocker patch ready to go. And here's what it's covering. And there is the fit up. Go ahead and weld that in place and seam seal it from behind. And there you are, a couple of photos with the seam sealer applied. It's a really high quality automotive product designed for exactly this purpose, and it does a fantastic job of it. After seam sealer was applied, I obviously masked the vehicle off and then primed the rockers with a high quality product again, and now we're ready for rocker guard application. Shop life got busy on me, and unfortunately I just didn't get video of that, so I'm going to call it a day here, but at least we got the metal fabrication portion on camera for you, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much for watching, always appreciated. Please subscribe, please come back to Bomber's Workshop any old time, and also check out the website and the Facebook page.